Hello guys and welcome to my new video. Why is everyone swapping to Holy Paladin? And let's go and have a look at the big rework that's happening patch 10.1.5 and my favorite things about Holy Paladin. So there's no big surprise that there's a lot of changes happening to Holy Paladin in the future, and Blizzard has announced a lot of things that they want to change about this class. Notably, you can see that Blizzard mentions that Holy Paladin felt like too many globals were being spent on damaging abilities purely to generate holy power, and this is evident because they removed talents like Radiant Onslaught. So without additional charges to Crusader's Strike, you're pressing it less, but you do have talents, again for example, that allow you to generate more holy power if you end up choosing this. And this is just one example of what Blizzard is doing in order to try and make Holy Paladin more fun. Again, you can agree and disagree. Keep in mind guys, this video is not going to talk about all of the changes that are happening to Holy Paladin, because let's be honest, if you're watching this video a week from now on, there's probably half the things that I say might be irrelevant, because Holy Paladin is extremely volatile in terms of the amount of changes that it's receiving. Let's go and have a look at some of my favorite changes. A lot of these are going to be focusing on Mythic Plus, so just keep that in mind. Straight away, Infusion of Light has been a bane of Holy Paladin existence for a really long time, depending on which expansion you're playing. A lot of the times, Infusion of Light was something that you just did not care about or did not play a focal point to Holy Paladin rotation, and Blizzard is trying to change that because they're unhappy about the consumption of Infusion of Light in Dragonflight as well. Now, what about the new Judgment? You can see here, now keep in mind all the talent build that I have here. This is purely for the memes. I'm trying out all the new abilities, just keep that in mind. Judgment deems a target unworthy, preventing a certain amount of damage dealt by the target, and you might be like, how does that work in Infusion of Light? What are you talking about? If you go to the default Infusion of Light right now, which is procced by critical holy shocks, that's always been the case, Graded Judgment prevents an additional 100% damage dealt by the target. So if we get Infusion of Light, let's hope for a holy shock crit, we didn't get it. That's also another thing. Holy Shock has double charges right now. The cooldown has been increased a little bit, but it has double charges. But on PTR, that's not working right now, so I cannot showcase multiple charge Holy Shock by speccing into Light's Conviction. Does not work. Holy Shock is crit. We're getting Infusion of Light. We're pressing Judgment. You can see here it consumed Infusion of Light, and you can see here next certain amount of damage is going to be prevented. I went in, the enemy dealt damage to me. And this is going to be showcased on the healing meters. You can see here the details, at least on PTR servers right now, is showcasing how much damage has been prevented by things like Graded Judgment. A relative quality of life improvement that I think a lot of Holy Paladins wanted, because they don't like, or at least how do I say, Infusion of Light has been iffy for a long time, depending on which build you're running. So better way of consuming Infusion of Light, way of preventing damage with Judgment is a pretty significant quality of life improvement. Oh, and did I forget to mention that Judgment also generates one holy power. Judgment is about to be juiced up in the next patch. And probably the biggest changes that are happening to Holy Paladin is to do with Glimmer, in my opinion, because I've been a fan of Glimmer of Light for a relatively long time. I've had the most fun of Glimmer in the previous expansions and things like that, but now you have multiple talents. The base number of Glimmer targets is going to be 3, and then you have talents like Illumination, where Glimmer of Light can affect 5 additional targets, or you have a talent Blessed Focus, where Glimmer of Light healing and damage is increased by 20%, but it can only affect 1 target at a time. I think that's going to be relatively niche situations where you would use this, but again, we'll have to see. Blizzard is going to change that. I generally feel that having 8 glimmers is going to be a pretty good number right now, because look at this. If I type in Glimmer, and you can't see it in the search bar, but if I type in Glimmer in the search bar, look at the amount of talents that affect Glimmer. There's so much emphasis on this right now. For example, there's a new talent. Your allies with Glimmer of Light take 16% reduced damage split. You have to remember this. Split evenly among them. So Glimmer can have damage reduction, and then on top of that, 50% of Glimmer Light's overhealing is converted into Absorb Shield. The shield amount cannot exceed 50% of maximum health. So Glimmer technically can have damage reduction and absorb. Now the absorb amount, and just to showcase it here, I'm gonna wait for Holy Shock. Again, you would have double Holy Shock charges to really showcase this, but I'm applying Glimmer, and then I'm healing with Glimmer, and then you can see the absorb is here. It doesn't last all that long. I wish the duration was a little bit longer, but generally speaking, you can see damage reduction and absorbs. On top of that, you have talents like Daybreak, where you absorb your active Glimmer of Lights, triggering their effect at 150% value and granting a certain amount of mana per Glimmer of Light consumed. This seems like an insane, how do I say, there's quite a few combinations for Holy Paladin right now that I can see. With Daybreak, for example, combined with something like Divine Toll. You apply Glimmers with Divine Toll, and then there's a lot of AU damage happening. You can consume them with Daybreak. And on top of that, you have a talent Rising Sunlight, which honestly, the combination of these two talents is probably the most fun thing that happened to Holy Paladin. Maybe not the most fun, but probably the most fun in terms of the rework, because after casting Daybreak, your next 3 Holy Shocks cast 2 additional times. So, for example, you have a bunch of glimmers out there, or you applied glimmers with something like Divine Toll, and then you're going to be pressing Daybreak to provide an insane amount of, and again, I have my logs right here, to provide an insane amount of burst healing. So let's say I have glimmers on a lot of people right now, and then I'm going to cast Daybreak. That's going to, and you can see it here, Glimmer of Light has healed, and that's going to apply to all the glimmer targets. And then, because of the talent Rising Sunlight, my Holy Shock is going to, and again, you can read this again, after casting Daybreak, your next 3 Holy Shocks cast 2 additional times. So I Holy Shock, and then Holy Shock is cast 2 additional times. I'm getting Holy Power, and I'm getting glimmers applied as well. So this is going to apply, so the Holy Power generation and applying glimmers and things like that is going to be so insane with this combo. I feel like the whole concept of having these two is so important. I think the Divine Toll combinations, because Daybreak is 1 minute cooldown, Divine Toll is 1 minute cooldown, and then that's the whole concept. There's so much Glimmer of Light, and again, I forgot about one of the talents, Glorious Dawn. Holy Shock has 10% chance to refund the charge when cast, which doesn't feel all that great, but increasing by 1.5% for each Glimmer of Light you have active. So the more glimmers you have, the higher chance. Again, Glimmer of Light healing and damage is increased by 10%. The whole concept of this rework, in my eyes, is to do about the fact that they're introducing or adding so much more value to having Glimmer and playing around Glimmer. I think that's going to be an interesting and an important aspect to the new Holy Paladin coming into patch 10.1.5. Now let's talk about Hammer of Wrath changes. So veneration has been changed. Now Hammer of Wrath heals up to 5 injured allies for a certain amount of the damage, don't split evenly among them. This is very similar to something like Ancient Teachings to Mistweaver Monks. It makes sense because a lot of the cooldowns that Holy Paladin has share similarities to Mistweaver Monk, because they're both regarded as melee healers by the game. So you're getting more value from using these abilities that previously might be regarded as more of a DPS abilities, things like Judgment, things like, again, Hammer of Wrath. They're climbing in value. You have to remember, Flashlight, Holy Light, and Judgment critical strikes reset the cooldown of Hammer of Wrath. So there is a lot of emphasis about using these two abilities, or increasing emphasis about using Judgment and Hammer of Wrath in 10.1.5. So Tears Deliverance is being changed to now work with Holy Shock, which is honestly such a simple improvement that has a lot of deep meaning to the class, because I'm not sure if Tears Deliverance or what is going to be the go-to build for raids and Mythic Plus, what is going to be the way to play in terms of being a caster or melee type of playstyle. I genuinely believe that Holy Paladin, no matter what content you're doing, or how do you say, if you're doing highest content in the world in terms of Mythic Plus and raids, you're most likely going to be melee. You need that damage, but I can definitely see that Blizzard is trying to add value to that caster build, because Tears Deliverance is going to work now with things like Holy Shock, and now you have things like Hand Divinity, where again 1.5 minute cooldown, 1.5 minute cooldown, and then you have things like Daybreak with 1 minute cooldown, and things like Divine Toll with 1 minute cooldown. So you could have combinations of, how do I say, combinations of burst AoE healing, or sustained AoE healing, or sustained healing in general, depending on which build you tend to go. So if you go with Tears Deliverance, you can go with something like Boundless Salvation. Your Holy Shocks, Flashlight, and Holy Light spells extend the duration of Tears Deliverance on yourself when cast on targets affected by Tears Deliverance. So Tears Deliverance can be extended up to 50 seconds. And if you have Hand of Divinity, calls upon light to empower your spells, causing your next 2 Holy Lights to heal 80% more, cost 50% mana, 50% less mana, and be instant cast. So what does this mean or translate into? Let's say you need healing and you're about to, again, you're going to be using Tear Deliverance on a target. Make sure you're tracking it with Grid 2 or some sort of, again, whatever health frame add-on you're using. Let's say I activate my Hand of Divinity. This lasts for a pretty long time. I'm going to cast Tears Deliverance. I know that they're going to get the buff here, which means the healing received from Holy Light, Flashlight, and Holy Shock are increased by 25%. And I'm going to cast instant cast Holy Lights on them. You can see the Tears Deliverance buff on myself is being extended. You can see that from Grid 2, which means that I'm healing an injured ally for a specific amount of healing, which again, I'm also applying a buff. And the fact that Holy Shock can extend this feels very, very impactful. It's such a small thing that they can change, that improves this talent, or this row of talents. I think there's a very interesting combinations emerging from the Holy Paladin rework that can only mean good things for Holy Paladin in the future. And on top of that, you have to look at ways of dealing damage as Holy Paladin. There are new talents out there where Shield of Righteous deals additional damage to its first target struck. Every 5 Shield of Righteous make your next Word of Glory or Light of Dawn cost no holy power. And I think this is going to be something that people might experiment with in something like Mythic Plus environment, because casting Shield of Righteous can feel sometimes weird when you only have one target, especially in live service right now. So I think this change could be something that will make it more interesting when dealing with single target rotations or how you spend your holy power. And I know Holy Paladin players are going to be somewhat upset about the fact that the mastery or how mastery works is still the same. I think a lot of Holy Paladin players wanted new mastery, but Blizzard did try to improve with the new talent. Again, it's not a new talent, it's a returning talent from good old times ago in terms of Beacon of the Lightbringer, where Mastery Lightbringer now increases your healing based on the target's proximity to either you or your Beacon of Light, whichever is closer, which makes it a little bit easier to micromanage in terms of how you're getting the max value out of your mastery. So overall, I'm quite excited about Holy Paladin coming to the next patch. Again, anything can and will change, but overall, I think the changes are pretty interesting. I think they make the gameplay a lot more fun, especially when you consider some like Mythicus environment. I haven't really talked about raiding too much because I do think there is a possibility or more viability towards a caster build, because there's quite a few talents that have been made more accessible or easier to play. And there are two groups to Holy Paladin. There are two groups that are constantly at battle. There are Holy Paladins who wants a caster build, and there are Holy Paladins who enjoy the melee build. I think anyone who's doing high-end content will agree that being a melee Holy Paladin just gives you more, how do I say, more advantages that you bring to the group, because you're providing additional damage, you still have to hit your Crusader strike, and you're counted as a melee by the game, which means that if you're standing in range, you can actually bait melee abilities to the ranged camp, which can sometimes feel a little bit awkward. But at the same time, like I said, I can see how the caster build is going to feel, or might feel, stronger because of a lot of the changes being made here. Guys, let me know which camp you're standing in. Do you want the caster build or do you want the melee build? I still feel that if you're playing Holy Paladin, especially in Mythicus environment, you need to bring that DPS. Additional DPS is always better towards the group's potential of success. In terms of viability of Holy Paladin, I think a bunch of people are swapping to Holy Paladin right now, because historically speaking, when a class gets a rework, it might do pretty well initially, because Resto Shaman received a rework a couple of months ago and he was very, very strong initially. The Tidebringer talents were very, very big. Resto Shaman was doing really well. It did receive a nerf, and then the talent, or how do I say, the tier set that Resto Shaman received in Season 2 wasn't all that great, so they did fall a little bit. But if I were a betting man, and I am, I would probably say the Holy Paladin is going to be doing pretty well in 10.1.5, because I don't think Blizzard wants the new reworked class to be undertuned or undervalued. I think the overall changes will make or improve the gameplay for Holy Paladin. I haven't looked too much in Raid because I'm not sure what the build is going to be, what is going to be the best build to play in Mythicus or Raids, but I can definitely feel that the emphasis on Glimmer for me feels really, really interesting, and the fact or quality of life improvements in terms of Judgment, in terms of Infusion of Light, in terms of Hammer of Wrath, in terms of new talents, in terms of new combination of talents, I think I'm very, very excited. Whether Holy Paladin is going to be meta or not, it's purely dependent on the tuning knobs, because you can have a spec that plays really badly but be absolutely meta because they're outputting a lot of healing and damage, and you could have a spec that plays really, really nice but it does not have the output that it deserves. So it really is dependent on how Blizzard is going to approach Holy Paladin in terms of numbers and things like that. But again, I talked about the fact that it is a new rework class, and I think Blizzard wants him to do pretty well, at least initially. I still feel that if the class is going to shine too much, it might receive a similar treatment to Restoration Shaman, but we'll see. There's one thing that is 100% certain. Holy Paladin is going to be the absolutely most hyped healer in patch 10.1.5.